Thank you for your attention and attendance. This is October 15th, Tuesday, a little after 1 p.m. This is the 2019 Hemp Task Force Joint Committee. Madam Clerk, if you would, call the roll, please.
Representative Reedy.
Here.
Representative Hurt.
Here.
Representative Love.
Here.
Representative Shaw.
Here.
Representative Terry.
Here.
Representative Smith. Senator Nicely. Senator Briggs.
Here.
Senator Reeves. Senator Robinson. Senator Gresham. Senator Swan.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any personal orders from the committee members at this time? Seeing none, I'm going to refer to Representative Chris Hurt, who carried the bill that made all of this task force possible. Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First want to start by thanking all the members for being here and their participation and everyone else that's involved with any presentations today. House Bill 1468, Public Chapter 387, we brought this forth in order to just address issues that we're seeing in the hemp industry. We think there's a lot of potential in the state of Tennessee, and we want to see Tennessee lead the way. We want to address issues or hear concerns from the Department of Ag, TBI, and any law enforcement, the growers, and we also want to discuss in any kind of quality standards that we may need to address moving forward. But we think it's a great opportunity for the state, but we also know there are some complications that we need to be aware of and we need to address. And we felt like this task force would give us some ideas moving forward into the 2020 legislative session. So again, thank you for being here and thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Representative Hurt. On our agenda, we're going to start off with the Department of Agriculture. If you folks will come forward for your presentation, make sure your microphone's on. Please introduce yourself for the record.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is David Waddell. I'm the Director of Law and Policy at the Department of Agriculture.
I'm Annie Self with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. I'm the Plant Certification Administrator.
Thank you. Please proceed.
All right. As you know, we've been charged with regulating the hemp industry as it's developing in Tennessee. We take great pride in that and are proud of the work that we have done and proud of the work that the growers and the industry has done as well. Kind of as a little bit of background material, we started out this program with when the Farm Bill of 2014 was enacted that allowed pilot projects by departments of agriculture to grow industrial hemp and do research. And we started our program in 2015. This was followed up in 2018 by the Farm Bill again, which did several things that the 2014 bill did not do. The 2018 Farm Bill removed hemp with a THC of less than 0.3 from the Controlled Substances Act. It not only removed the hemp from the Controlled Substances Act, but also the THC within that hemp, the 0.3%. So none of that is considered a drug under the Controlled Substances Act at the federal level at this point. Back in 2014, the legislature passed Public Chapter 916, and that authorized us to adopt several sets of rules. It's been a learning process and a growing process, and we've been not afraid to change our rules as we needed to, as we saw the program growing and changing. And we're continuing that process with a new set of rules that have yet to be finalized. We had a rulemaking hearing, I think on September the 24th, and we are waiting and to see what the federal folks are going to do. The Department, USDA, had implied early on in this year that they would have their rules in place by August. We haven't seen them yet. They moved it to say the fall, but we would like to see those rules before we finalize our rules to make sure they coalesce. We had a bill in the legislature last spring that made our law as close to the federal law as possible, and we promulgated some emergency rules following that brought our program in line with what we thought the federal program would need. It requires the states to submit a plan and have that approved by USDA before the state can take primacy in regulating hemp. We were the third state to submit a plan, but we've since been told by USDA that we'll probably have to submit it again when their rules are finalized. But we wanted to be in the forefront with USDA to make sure that they knew Tennessee wanted to be in charge of the hemp program in Tennessee and not USDA. The plan had to contain several components. It seems one of the primary things that USDA is concerned about is the location of the hemp farms, and of course our law has always required applicants to submit to us their GPS coordinates and the exact location of their growing areas. The plan will also include a procedure for testing. That's one of the things that USDA is looking at, is whether they consider Delta-9 THC or total THC as the standard to judge the 0.3%. We're using Delta-9, but we'll have to see what the USDA comes out with in their rules. The federal program has to have a procedure for disposal of any hemp that's found to be above the limit. We have to have enforcement procedures in place, which we do already, and a procedure for submitting all the information required by USDA that they require. One of the benefits of the Farm Bill has been that since it's no longer illegal at the federal level, that hemp farmers are now eligible for crop insurance, and they may participate in federal grants and programs, and research can take place on hemp as it's now listed under the Farm Bill. One of the things that we're not sure of is specifically in the Farm Bill, it said that FDA and USDA still have the power to regulate hemp as a food item or an animal feed item, and FDA at this point has not given any guidance, any strong guidance on how they are proceeding. They have, in some cases, gone after some CBD producers, primarily based on label claims, not on just the content of the CBD product, but false label claims that can't be backed up by research. But we are waiting on USDA and as well as FDA to let us know what's going on. I'll turn it over to Annie and let her talk about the program itself and the participation that we've had and some of the challenges that we've had.
So when the program first started, is this on? Okay, all right. So the first year that we issued licenses was 2015. We had 44 licensed hemp growers. At that time, you could have as many growing areas as you wanted, and we had one license holder that started out with 95 growing areas across the state. So that was part of the reason why we changed our rules to one growing area per license. Then the next year, we still were moving kind of slowly. We had 64 license holders, and I don't think anybody really had a good crop yet. We were still struggling with seed varieties. A lot of our seed came in from Canada. The second year, we got some in from Europe, had low germination rates. It wasn't really suited to grow here. And in 2017, we had 79 license holders, and we had more seed sources. And I think growers were also starting to learn how to grow hemp here in Tennessee, as opposed to, we had people coming in from Colorado, and then the Canadian seed dealers were telling us how to grow hemp here. And one of the things that they said was you didn't have to worry about weeds because the hemp would grow so fast it would shade out the weeds. Well, maybe in Canada, but not here. So then 2018, we had 226 license holders, and we thought we had a huge number of licenses with the 226. So this is a little kind of diagram of where the growing areas were last year. We had a lot of growers in upper middle Tennessee, a lot of the tobacco growing area. Then, of course, in 2019, as everybody knows, hemp just exploded. As of this morning, and I try to check this every day when we give a presentation just to make sure we have the latest numbers. And I did look at our database before I left to come down here. We've had a few more added since this morning. But we had 3,730 licensed growers and about 51,000 licensed acres. Those aren't necessarily planted acres, but they are licensed. And you can see where the greatest concentration of the growers are. So with our new regulations that David mentioned earlier, we don't regulate processors anymore. We only regulate the growing and cultivation of hemp. Only rooted hemp plants are regulated. You don't need, you can move seed freely. You can bring it in from other states. You don't have to have a seed import request anymore. And we also have a year-round application process. And now that hemp's legal, you don't have to fill out all the extra paperwork that we did require in the past few years. We also have an online movement permit application system that, for the most part, works really well. So the different kinds of licenses you can get now are the hemp grower license. It's a license per growing area. We don't have any limits on the size of the growing area, and we went to a tiered feed system, and the smallest size is up to 5 acres, or less than 5 acres is $250, and then it goes up to $350 depending on size of your operation. You can breed seed with this license, and you can also sell seedlings and clones with this. If you're going to make anything edible, you have to have a food manufacturing license. This is in place of the processor license, and you get that through our food safety section. If you're gonna label seed and distribute it, you have to have a seed seller license, which is through our ag input section. And then if you're weighing using scales to sell or distribute your hemp, you also have to have certified scales for commercial use. So we inspect and sample the hemp growing areas. We ask that the growers contact us 30 days before they plan to harvest to give us enough time to schedule it and get the samples through our lab. So this year, we tried to clarify our sampling process a little better. And while we intended to sample everybody at some point, we're not required to sample everybody. So if you were just growing a few plants for your personal use, there's a chance you weren't sampled. If you're growing for fiber, we may or may not have sampled you. If you had less than 2 acres, we may or may not have sampled you. And if you were selling to a processor and the processor tested your hemp, we may or may not have sampled that. We developed this little schematic to try to explain our sampling process a little better and put that up on our website. So at this time, we don't recognize private lab testing, but we do encourage our growers to get their crop tested just to see where their THC content is as they go through the growing season. We have a standard sampling protocol we follow to collect the samples that we've used since the beginning of the program. We dry our samples first. We don't heat them up before we send them to the lab. Our samples are done on an HPLC MS. And right now, we only report Delta-9 THC. We can test for THCA, but at this point, we're only reporting the Delta-9. Should USDA require that we test total THC, our lab can switch over to that very quickly. We charge $150 for each sample that we test in the TDA lab. We understand that it's very difficult to tell the difference between hemp and marijuana. The only way you can really tell is by testing. You can't tell by appearance. You can't tell by the smell. You have to test it. So to help with the confusion between the hemp and marijuana, we put together these movement permits. We always required them in the past, but with the new regulations, when only rooted hemp plants were regulated, we really didn't need anything to transport harvested hemp. But we tried to work with law enforcement, and we tried all along to work with the sheriffs and the state highway patrol and TBI to make things run smoother for all of us. So this is when we came up with this online movement permit. And we also require that harvested hemp moving from the farm, the grower, to the processor, even though it's not regulated, those folks still need a movement permit. So at TDA, we have monthly conference calls with a group of hemp regulators around the country. This started about 4 years ago when everybody was trying to figure out how we were going to put these programs together and how we were going to run them. This group has gotten to be really big in the last couple of years. Last year, we had an annual meeting in Minneapolis where everybody talked about the issues that they were having, and they seem to be the same all across the country. The group is trying to standardize the hemp regulations amongst the states, which is a little bit complicated because often these programs are housed in different sections of state governments. So we've developed this web page as the program's developed. Our public affairs staff has been very helpful to keep this updated. We post to new growers on a monthly basis, any changes that we have go up on this webpage. We have a little forum section where other people can share information. We also post any meetings, any public events that we're aware of. So if you have any questions for us.
Thank you for that presentation. Any of the committee members have, Chairman Hurt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I saw on one of the slides there, it had a listing of seed certification. Where do we stand as far as the seed certification process? Because I know in some of the seed, and it's kind of, a lot of the buyers and growers don't know what they're dealing with yet, but I have read where there was a certification process being worked on. Where do we stand on that?
If you want to produce certified seed, you go through Tennessee Crop Improvement Association. Otherwise, you would follow the same standards for other seed in Tennessee.
The certified seed is no longer required. Under the first piece of legislation we required all seed to be certified through a Crop Improvement Association, and we just found it was too hard to find certified seed for the demand that we had, so we removed that requirement.
Senator Briggs.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions just to be sure that I understand how you're doing your inspections. I think you said before harvest time comes, they can notify the Department of Agriculture. Let's take a case they've got a plot of 50 or 75 acres, which you might want to come out and test it. Do you take samples and then send those to the laboratory, and what you're really looking at is for the THC content?
That's correct. We only test for THC. We don't test for CBD or
Okay, yeah.
anything else.
Well, the other question, because there's been several reports, I was reading about this some before we had the task force today. We were talking about it right before the meeting started back here in a private conversation, is that there's been some users that have bought what they thought was legitimate CBD oil. It came from plants with less than 0.3% THC, and then they're showing up positive on their THC at work. Have we had any reports on this? Do we know why this is happening? I mean, one of the explanations is that a person could be, smoking regular marijuana that's made them, and they're claiming that, there's a lot of different possibilities. But do we have any data that if you were a daily user of CBD that had less than 0.3%, that accumulates to the point where it may make your drug test positive, which could jeopardize your job and your reputation and maybe a lot of other things too? Do we have any information on that?
We don't.
No, we really have focused on the growing and the production of the hemp, and once it leaves the farm, we haven't done any research or compiled any data. We have heard of those instances and that problem, but we have no data on that problem.
Yeah, I could see it would be difficult maybe tracing that down, and I didn't know if there was any information available on that, because it'd be very unfortunate if you had someone who was a truck driver who loses his livelihood thinking he's doing everything right. Yeah.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of along that same line, because I'm a little bit not confused but off kittle. I heard you talk about, David, when you first started, that you're kind of waiting for the federal government to set out some guidelines and so forth before the state does, but you are at the same time regulating the growing, the cultivating, and the testing. Can you help me with that? Because if we don't know what the federal government guidelines are going to be, are we doing the right thing by checking on the growing and cultivating and testing?
The 2018 Farm Bill contained language that said the 2014 Farm Bill stays in effect until USDA's regulations for the 2018 Farm Bill come out. So we're operating under the same standards really that we did under the 2014 Farm Bill as far as inspections and testings and in our total program.
But we really don't know what the federal government is going to do. I guess what bothers me a little bit in this, in terms of protecting the growers, because they're doing what they think they should do. But if some guidelines come out that could affect positive or negatively with what the growers are doing, and how would the growers be protected through that process until we got it all on level ground?
As far as that period of where we are right now, kind of in limbo, waiting for the feds to come out with their regulations, the growers are safe operating under the same guidelines that they've had since 2014. Okay. And once the feds come out, the federal law will supersede state law, and we'll be able to advise growers and how they can stay compliant with whatever the federal rules are. We don't expect the federal rules to place any stricter guidelines really than what's already in place. We haven't had any indication that there's going to be anything drastic in the federal rules.
Okay. Last question, this CBD, I believe, all. I've had people who've called me who said they tested positive that have used it. How do we handle that? Because you can't get a job if you test positive, you know. So are we saying this is mother's first cousin, sister's child to marijuana? What are we saying? Because if people use the oil for good purposes and for the right reasons, but they test positive and it's a setback in many ways, are we addressing that issue, and how are we going to handle that?
Well, as the department, we really have no authority to deal with the drug aspect of it. That is a post-harvest situation, and we have not investigated or been involved in that. But we have heard that the use of CBD has caused some people to test positive for THC. I'm assuming that even though it was below 0.3% THC, that it somehow accumulates, or the tests that they use are able to test to that lower level.
I thank you, Representative Shaw. Senator Nicely.
We've talked about this very problem a lot in the Senate, and you know you're not a drunk driver till you reach 0.8, but on marijuana it's zero tolerance. I think we need to come up with some kind of compromise there. If your CBD levels are below a certain point, you shouldn't get fired. We just need to come up with some reasonable level. I don't think that using CBD oil that's less than 3.3 is ever going to run your test up to where it would bother you. But as long as these manufacturers have a zero tolerance, I mean, that's pretty rough. Go ahead, Doc.
Senator Briggs.
I think I think Senator Nicely has a very good point on that. I'll tell you what the military does as a former military commander, is that the military did set their threshold at a level, because the troops were saying, well, I was at a party and there were fumes, and all I breathed were the fumes, and I really didn't do it. And they were coming up positive at very low levels. But what the military caused, and remember, these are guys flying airplanes and carrying nuclear weapons, so they're, this is pretty serious. But what they did is what Senator Nicely is suggesting, is that they set a level that wasn't positive until it was above a certain level. And I don't know if businesses actually have a zero tolerance or not. I mean, I don't know what, it probably varies by the, by the particular industry. But there is a way, there is a way around that. And I don't know what it is, but I do know, if you do smoke a marijuana cigarette, you're going to test positive at a fairly high level for a period of time. Just what I think's happening, and I don't know this is anyone's guess is as good as mine, is that you're taking this very low level of the THC, because it's eliminated slowly. And if you are using the CBD oil every day, it may be accumulating, not to the point where you're impaired or intoxicated, but that may be what's making it eventually show up. And now this is something that may be out of the realm of the Department of Agriculture, maybe more in health or Department of Commerce or someone else that needs to look at this, and it may be a problem that's bigger that can even be handled in the type of research that Tennessee needs to do. But to find out, what really happens with that, sounds like that would be a great study for some agricultural PhD candidate to me.
Well, Senator Briggs, a question for you in the military. Of course, I've been there as well, but your medical profession, was there in the drug testing that they took, was there a different steps, kind of like alcohol, the percentage in the blood system? Or
No, what they did is that you're either positive or you're negative, but what they call positive, it's a little bit like what Senator Nicely talked about drunk driving. It was not positive until you got to a certain level.
Right. Well, and folks on the committee, we don't have the Department of Health visiting with us today, but we can certainly come back. We've got, per the bill that Representative Hurt and Senator Nicely had, that we could absolutely have 2 more of these task force meetings. So with that, Chairman Terry.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions for you. You'd made some comments. I didn't catch all of one of your comments. You said that processors currently aren't regulated. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But you said growers, and who else were you regulating?
Seed sellers,
The seed sellers?
commercial scales are regulated.
Okay.
And anybody making an edible product.
So anybody how about the sales? Do you regulate that as well? Or is that?
Not general, just sales of the harvested crop, no.
Okay. And then you mentioned, as far as the plan that came through about the plan for disposal in case the THC content was higher than 0.3. Do you know what rate you're coming in at as number of percentage of plants that are coming in over that amount?
We haven't had any this year.
None. Okay, 0.
Not yet.
And then another question you said on one of your opening comments about the Farm Bill and hemp with 0.3 or less THC, and you said THC from a plant that is from a plant that's got less than 0.3 or less is also considered legal at this point. My question then becomes, is it if that THC is now legal and it's put into a product, whether it's an oil or an edible or something like that, and you said it was legal if it's from that plant, can it have a higher concentration in that plant?
It would still have to be below 0.3.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and mine is just a procedural question that pertains to your presentation. Will that be made available to us?
We can certainly do that. We'll be glad to.
Because it was a lot of information. I just didn't simply want to try to remember all of it. All
We'll be glad to.
Thank you.
Senator Nicely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, I think I heard Commissioner Hatcher say that between 0.3 and 1.0 in a field, if you tested in the field, that was the state. He had control of what to do there. And after 1, it had to be destroyed. It was going to the federal government, but from 0.3 to 1, that he had some discretion. Maybe test it again, blend it out, do something. And the other question is, have we had to destroy any crop for being over 0.3?
Not this year. Have we? We have in the past.
Few years.
But this year, have we this year?
We have not this year.
Are the varieties getting better?
I think so.
What, do you know anything about the discretion between 0.3 and 1 that the commissioner and the state
Under
has?
the Farm Bill, it has that gap between 0.3 and 1%. The way they look at it, if you have a crop and it pops above 0.3 but less than 1, they consider that a negligence or a negligent act and do not treat it as a criminal act as much as they would if it were just strictly marijuana. But if you pop 3 times, they consider that an intentional act, and then all the criminal penalties would ensue at that point. So there is a kind of a lesser criminal penalty for less than one if you're only caught that one time, but it would still have to be destroyed, and if it was tested again and confirmed to be above 0.3, it would still have to be destroyed. It's your criminal penalty might have a difference between 0.3 and 1 if it was your first time.
Have we destroyed any this year?
Not this year.
Well, the legislature, the chairman of the AG's not here, but we've been talking about it, you know, if it's above 3, but less than 1, we know when it goes to the processor, it's going to be processed and it's going to go above 0.3, and then it's going to come back down to 0.3 before it goes out to the end product. So what we're trying to come up with, we need some help on it, some kind of red tag it, put a marker on it, put a tracer on it, do something, label it where you watch it till it gets to the processor. Because once it gets to the processor, it's and they run it down, it's going to get back above 0.3 and then be run back, diluted back down to 0.3. So I can't see that as much of a criminal offense if it's, I can't see destroying a farmer's crop if it's below 1. When the stuff they're smoking on the streets evidently 15 to 30, and we're talking about less than 1. I think West Virginia raised theirs to 1 instead of 0.3. So I think y'all need to do some thinking and help us come up with some stuff to make it. The thought of destroying somebody's crops is foreign to me.
We hope not to have to, and so far we've been fortunate that we haven't had to.
And I also heard that you can take the same sample, send it to 2 labs, get 2 different the results back. So
we keep 2 samples, and as a control, we don't send it to 2 different labs. We'll run it again in our lab.
But we test, and another thing, the boys on the farm that are raising it, they can get it tested in Knoxville for $60 and THC and CBD both. I mean, do y'all not think maybe you're a little high at 150 and just testing for 1? I mean, maybe if you come down, maybe we'd send you some more business.
We've got all that we can handle at this point, Senator. But,
well, it seems like you're a little high on your testing.
Okay, thank you. We'll take that under advisement.
Thank you, Senator Nicely. Representative Smith, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for this afternoon. A couple of questions. Relative to the crops of Tennessee, you're with agriculture. What's our number 1 commodity or number 1 generator of crops in the state? Is it soybeans, corn? What's number 1, then 2 and 3? I'm trying to get an understanding of where hemp may fall in the revenue.
I think it fluctuates year to year. Mm-hmm. It's usually either corn, soybeans, or cotton. I would say those 3 would be the top 3.
Okay. And relative to the amount of hemp that's sold, kind of offer us a benchmark. What the amount of hemp that's sold is compared to what other crop in the state, or anything else?
Up to this point, it would be, we've had a negligible amount, really, statistically, of hemp that's been sold. And with this year, with so many people growing and so many acres, we may be able to quantify a particular amount. But up to this point, would have a negligible effect on any statistic.
And is there, in the production of corn, I would assume, and you can clarify and correct me if I'm wrong, is there food grade production, like in corn versus energy? Like if you're going to use the corn product for ethanol, I would guess that there's a little bit of a difference in the strain and hybrid species than would be grown for food. Kind of inform me on how, is there medical grade hemp grown versus that which is used for rope and other products for resale?
There are different varieties of hemp. There are many different varieties. Some are famous for being high in CBD. Mm-hmm. Some are known to be better for fiber that would have very low levels of CBD or whatever, but are great for fiber. There are many different varieties, and that's one of the things that our growers are learning is which varieties work the best.
So
in
they are
Tennessee.
learning. So this is an
Yes.
ongoing process that is not yet defined.
That's
so,
right.
So as we're sitting here writing law, and we very broadly use the term hemp, which one of those strains does it cover? Medical?
It covers all of them. When we say hemp, we mean any hemp, whether it's going to be used for CBD or fiber or hempcrete or any other product.
So what I hear you say is we need to designate, as we legislate, the end use to make sure that we're not constructing an overly restraining type of I guess, a system or an architecture of law or statute for that which would produce rope versus that which could be medically used.
That can be very possible.
Okay. And one last question, Mr. Chairman, if you just indulge me. I have a very active Manufacturers Association group in my district and in my area in Chattanooga. And without fail, they are very acutely and aggressively opposed to the use of medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, because of liability. And so if you might, based on your information, I know you're the Department of Agriculture, but if you might speak to what you think and have seen and challenge us as legislators how to construct some type of law that would protect a lot of these workforce places from liability, because impairment is a tremendous issue, and whether you're truck drivers, folks on the Volkswagen assembly line, we've put a couple of $1 billion as a state into Volkswagen, into General Motors. Inform us on what you see other states doing to either protect that liability, or do we need to wait for the federal government? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Representative Shaw.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think maybe it's been said, it seemingly there's a lot of research that needs to be done. And I'm not sure we can do it all in this state. I think it's going to have to be the feds and us together doing it, because evidently, and I read in this report this morning, that it just quadrupled over this year. I mean, so many people started growing hemp so fast. So I think we got ahead of the game. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure any of us know very much what we're talking about, other than, say, Representative Hurt, who maybe has grown some, know how to grow it, but in terms of regulations and how we should pass legislation and all, I would caution us to move very slowly and very carefully so that we protect our farmers and the people who are just out there trying to make an honest living doing it, because obviously we don't know a whole lot about it.
Thank you, Representative Shaw. Final question from the chair. Can you speculate at all when we're going to hear from FDA, from the Farm Bill for 2018? I know they said August, then they said September, and then here we are, October.
All they're saying now is the fall. So okay. I guess that technically goes up to December 21st.
Any further questions at all for our folks from? We appreciate you being here, and we'll continue this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. If you folks would come up, make sure the light is on for your microphone. Introduce yourselves to us, please.
Afternoon, Chairman and members. I'm Jimmy Music, Senior Policy Advisor for the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. I'm going to talk for a second so that Mike can get his PowerPoint set up. But today, one, thank you all for inviting us. We know that we have kind of a periphery issue on the hemp industry, but a lot of the things that are kind of the unforeseen growing pains end up kind of in the law enforcement camp sometime. So I appreciate you, even in this first one, inviting us to be here to give you our 2 cents and answer any questions that you have. So I have Mike Little with me. He's the Assistant Director of our TBI Crime Lab. and then Tommy Farmer, Special Agent in Charge for the Tennessee Dangerous Drug Task Force. And so if it's all right with you, I was trying to keep some notes. I think we could probably talk to some of those drug testing questions and employment to give you our kind of view of that and what we've seen, because we do toxicology as the kind of the drugs in your blood. And then the forensic chemistry side is the solid drugs, and we have both disciplines at TBI. So if an officer pulls your blood for, it doesn't matter if it was alcohol or they suspect you of taking prescription opioids or whatever it is, it comes to us for processing. So we have that side of the equation as well. But with that, I'll just turn it over to Mike, and then feel free to interrupt us whenever with your questions.
All right, I'm Mike Little. I'm the Assistant Director over the Crime Lab Division at TBI. That is a good question. Now I believe it is. All right, I'm going to run through this PowerPoint relatively quickly. If you guys have questions, please feel free to jump in at any time. So we operate the Forensic Chemistry Unit for the state of Tennessee, where we analyze drugs that come in to be tested for prosecution purposes. Business is good. Our case submissions are way up. We're probably a unit that's designed to handle about 22,000 cases a year. We are on track for 2019 to receive almost 34,000 cases. Here's kind of a rundown of the top 10 drugs that we expect to see this year. This is extrapolated on what we've seen for the first half of the year, and marijuana is the #1 drug that we expect to see. Just a few comments about some of the trends that we're seeing. Cocaine is down. That's a good thing over the years. Total opiates are actually down, and that's a good thing over the years. The legislator has paid a lot of attention to prescription opiates, and we're seeing that hydrocodone is down and oxycodone is down. Unfortunately, that's being replaced by heroin, fentanyl, and total fentanyl and fentanyl analogs. So we're seeing tons of these things. Methamphetamine is through the roof, and it's soon going to be the #1 drug that we see. And when we think about methamphetamine in Tennessee, we probably think about a meth lab and somebody manufacturing that from Sudafed. But you guys have done a very good job in regulating Sudafed, and this is what homemade methamphetamine kind of looks like. In 2012, the Tennessee Dangerous Drugs Task Force responded to over 1,800 meth labs. That number was 104 in 2018, a decline of 94%. We're paying attention to those meth labs, so how is it that our meth numbers are way up? This is what a meth case looks like for us now. We suspect that this comes across the border from the drug cartels. This is very high purity, and for somebody with a chemistry degree, this is very impressive, the size of these crystals. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and that's been a constant in everybody's life, and a constant in the TBI Crime Lab's life is marijuana. We average approximately 10 to 11,000 samples of marijuana every year. We have forever, and that seems to be the pace that we're on. We get it in all kinds of forms. Here's some pictures of what we get. You will notice that none of this is rooted marijuana. This is marijuana that's seized by law enforcement agents. We also see some edibles, and here's some examples of gummies that contain CBD and other things. And we track those separately, and we're seeing an increase in the THC that we're seeing from edibles as well. So now we talk about hemp legalization. Hemp has been legalized in Tennessee, with 0.3 being the limit. And as the people from agriculture correctly stated, you can't tell the difference looking at it. It's the same plant. It looks the same. It smells the same. The only way to tell the difference is to do complicated chemical testing to determine if it's greater than 0.3. TBI and other crime labs have historically done plant material testing a pretty simple way because anything that was the plant cannabis sativa was marijuana by definition, so all we had to do was prove that it was cannabis sativa. So we would look at it under the microscope to determine what botanical characteristics we had. We would run a color test on it called the Duquesnoy-Levy, and if it turned purple, we were good to say that that was cannabis sativa and that was marijuana. But when hemp comes along, that's changed the game for us. Differentiating between hemp and marijuana has been a topic of great interest to crime labs on a national scale, and it's not only influenced by federal law, but it's also influenced by state law. Anecdotally, Tennessee Crime Lab is on the cutting edge of testing in crime labs. We went through our annual ISO, or excuse me, our every 4-year ISO ANAB accreditation assessment in 2019, and we expect to be one of the first crime labs that's actually accredited to ISO standards to perform THC quantitation in a crime lab setting. So how do we do that? You guys may have heard of the Swiss test or the 4AP test. That is a test that's based upon the amount of CBD and THC in a sample, in a plant material. Samples that contain relatively large amount of THC, such as marijuana, and a relatively low amount of CBD turn blue in the presence of this color test. If you have a lot of CBD and relatively small amounts of THC, it's going to turn pink. So that allows us to get a hint to kind of tell the difference. We've actually set up a gradient from 100% CBD down to 90% THC to determine where this thing actually cuts off. And what we have found is that if it's 90% THC or greater, it's going to turn blue. Anything less than that turns pink. So we're using that to our advantage, and we've come up with a 3-step testing protocol. The first thing that we do is we perform the microscopic test and the color test as we always have, and now we add this new color test to that to determine if it turns pink or if it turns blue. If it turns blue, we're going to issue a report that says visual and chemical color testing presumptively indicate the exhibit is marijuana. If it turns pink, it's a similar statement, but it says that presumptively it's hemp. Additional testing will be performed only at the district attorney's request, and we're getting lots of requests from the district attorneys. So what we do next is we try to determine if it's greater than 1%. The way that we do that is using an instrument called a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, and we use a method that was developed by DEA to just compare it to a standard that's 1% and say, is it more or less than 1%? And the beauty of, I believe Senator Nicely mentioned, is that marijuana that's on the street may be 15% or higher. So it's relatively easy to tell the difference between the two drugs because the marijuana you smoke is generally going to be way higher than what is in hemp. And so 1% or greater is useful to DAs and prosecution. If they really need to have it, we can go on and do further testing to tell them exactly what the THC content is between 0.1 and 1%. We've talked a lot about the 2018 Federal Farm Bill, and the word decarboxylation was listed in there, and it requires a procedure for testing using post-decarboxylation or some other similarly reliable methods. And what post-decarboxylation means is that you're converting THCA, which is THC acid or THC that's available in that plant, into delta-9 THC, which is the compound that gets you high. Tennessee put similar language into their law, and they required the Department, Agriculture, to use methods to employ liquid chromatography, tandem mass spectrometry in a manner similarly reliable to post-decarboxylation to determine THC concentrations. We don't have LC mass specs, nor do we have the money to purchase LC mass specs. If we were to test all of the samples that come in, it would cost us approximately $1.5 million upfront and about $240,000 a year for instrumentation, about $69,000 a year upfront and about $9,000 recurring. And the biggest expense for us is going to be people. Somebody's got to do that testing. So we estimate about $867,000 upfront and $774,000 per year after that, for a total first-year cost of about $2.4 million, followed by a little over $1 million in recurring tests in order for us to test every sample that comes in to the standard that has been set forth in Tennessee law to determine if that contains 0.3% or greater THC. Now, I've talked about a lot of issues that we have and a lot of problems, so it may seem like that the logical solution is to just legalize everything and we don't have to worry about it. But as Jimmy said, we also do blood testing in drivers in Tennessee, and about 45% of the samples that we get from drivers in Tennessee test positive for cannabinoids. To break that down a little bit further, we confirmed 3 specific cannabinoids. THC, which is the active ingredient, is present in 31% of our drivers. Hydroxy-THC, which is an active metabolite, is in 24% of our drivers. And carboxy-THC, which is an inactive metabolite, we find in 39% of our samples. That's pretty much all I got. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you.
Questions from the committee? Chairman Smith.
That last piece of information, those 3 separate components of THC, which one of those did you say was psychoactive? The last one, the 39% of your samples were carboxy? Is that correct?
Let me get on that slide for
I
you.
apologize, sir.
That's all right. It would be the second to the last one. I will. All right, so when somebody performs a drug screen, and this might answer some of the other questions we've had earlier, you're really doing 2 things. The first thing that you do, as Representative Shaw talked about brothers, cousins, nephew's wife, or whatever it was he said, is you're looking for things that are members of that family of compounds. So we do a presumptive test first that looks to see what cannabinoids, what things that are indicative of marijuana are present. That's the 45% that we're talking about. We then do further testing to specifically tell you that the compound THC, which is the active component, the delta-9 that you get when you ingest marijuana, is present. Hydroxy THC is what your body turns it into. It's part of why you get high, and it's part of the responsibility to look for that. So that is an active metabolite. Carboxy THC has no effect on the body, but the only way you're going to get carboxy THC is by ingesting a marijuana product.
And if I might, sir, it's the active metabolite that is an aggregate. It accumulates over time. Is that correct?
It can, yes.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Dr. Terry?
Thank you. Appreciate you guys coming testify. And I think we've had this conversation before, but can you go back to the slide on the color change testing? So
Which one do you want to see?
Well, I wanted to get to the 3 tests, and you said the first one was just a color
Right,
test.
so the first one is just a color test.
And so if it's positive or negative, it's either the plant or it's not, but you can't differentiate
Right,
between the two.
So what we're doing is we're taking advantage of what God has given us in the plant, and that hemp has lots of CBD and very little THC. Marijuana has lots of THC and very little CBD. This color test is able to take advantage of that ratio. For those that have lots of THC and very little CBD, it's going to turn blue. For those that have lots of CBD and very little THC, it's going to turn pink. That allows us to presumptively say that this compound, that this is cannabis sativa, and it's indicative of either marijuana or hemp.
Okay. On the one, you had a percentage, I thought it was like 9%. Yeah, that one right there. Are you saying that it only, at what point does it turn positive on that? Are you saying 90% THC?
The far right end of it is the blue one, and you have to have about 90% THC and about 10% CBD or less in order for that to turn positive.
So anything less than 90% THC is going to be negative? Is that?
Well, the ratio, yeah, the ratio of that. And you have to focus that we're thinking about plant material here. So when you start talking about gummy bears or things that are manipulated by man where we've adjusted those results, all of this goes out the window.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Hurt.
Again, thank y'all for being here. A couple of questions. This test, and I guess what see if this refers to it, but roadside test that you do on product. Is this what
This is a test that has commonly been used by law enforcement as a roadside test. For example, the state of Virginia, which has different laws than we do, has issued a statement from their crime labs where they're requiring their law enforcement agents to use this field in the test, in the field, prior to sending it to the lab for testing.
Gotcha. Okay, so you can kind of tell a little bit of difference on the roadside between the extremes now, whereas I know before there was some discussion because it was either positive or negative, but y'all taking the next step.
As Tommy said, assuming that you can get the test, this test is in very short supply because a lot of people are figuring out that this may be the most practical way that we have to do something to determine whether things are hemp or marijuana. Now again, we're only talking about plant material because as you start adjusting those levels of THC and hemp artificially, this really is of no value.
Gotcha. My next question would, and I've got 2 more, Mr. Chairman, if you'd let me. The slide you went to, I think it was second to the last slide that you were just on that Chairman referred to earlier. Yes, sir. If someone was just taking legal CBD over the counter and they're taking it pretty regular, how would they show up on this type of test?
I truly don't know the answer to that question. I think that you can, there's probably 3 scenarios that we can talk about when it comes to getting a test in a blood sample or urine sample that tests positive for marijuana. The first one may simply be that it's not a complete test, that they're relying on that screen test, as may often be the case in workplace testing to determine that somebody's positive. We at the crime lab, for example, we got a urine sample volunteered from a known CBD user. We ran that first presumptive test on it, and it was positive.
Right.
We ran the second test to see if there were any actual compounds from marijuana in there, and they weren't there. It was not positive. So the first question that I would have is when we're talking about workplace testing, let's see that test. Let's see what we're talking about, and let's see if it was actually a complete test. Okay. The second thing is let's say that we get to the confirmation step, and we've decided that THC is there. How did it get there? Well, it probably got there one of 2 different ways. It could be that you were using a 0.3 or less compound and you were using enough of it that accumulated over time. Or it could be that you thought you were using a 0.3% compound and it really wasn't. I think that Representative Shaw talked about the need for further testing and perhaps the need for further testing at the federal level. That's a very complicated compound. On the federal level, marijuana is still an illegal compound, and it's very difficult to get human testing done on illegal compounds.
Yeah, which kind of leads me into my involvement in pursuing this task force was some of my sheriffs were, it was more of a quality question of what was on, how could we test what was actually being put on the shelves?
Right.
And I think we're still heading that direction, but we're not there yet, of course,
Right,
with discussion.
and I think we are an interesting intersection between investigation and regulation. I think that if this were corn or soybeans or cotton, I wouldn't see it at the crime lab, but if it's bad hemp, it just happens to be marijuana, and we're getting a lot of pressure from law enforcement agents and from district attorneys for us to be able to tell the difference. If we had tighter regulation, we would protect the farmers, we would protect the people who are legitimately using this and legitimately producing it, and we wouldn't have to worry about those people that are using hemp as an excuse for passing off marijuana.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. My last question, real quick, but referring to our discussion earlier, a grower that their test comes back between the 0.3 and 0.1, what's the likelihood that they will, I know that they're going to do some more tests probably to make sure because there's discrepancy at the Department of Ag, but the likelihood that they will be pursued with charges if they're under the 0.1?
That's probably a better question for the district attorneys. We are very early in our stages of performing the is it greater than 1% testing. We have had, as I understand it, very little callback. I don't think that DAs are interested in prosecuting cases that are people that are growing hemp, even if they're just not very good at growing hemp and happen to get 1%.
Gotcha. Thank y'all for what you do. Thank you.
Senator Nicely.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I know the Department of Ag says that corn and soybeans are our number one crop in Tennessee, but I've heard for years that marijuana was our number one crop. Can you comment on that?
I think that's a fastball down the middle for Tommy Farmer.
We are not number one. We are actually number 3 from eradicated cannabis in the nation. We were.
I'm glad to hear that, but I don't believe it.
Okay. California had that dubious distinction, and Kentucky, we were behind Kentucky.
Yeah, thank you very much. We don't need that. Yes. Representative Love, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm following up on the representative's questions about testing and about what happens on the road. And I think, memory serves me correctly, that there was testimony given in the previous session we were in this past spring about the difficulty of the dogs to differentiate between hemp and marijuana when they scent gets in their nose. So is that still an issue?
I do not deal directly with dogs. I recently attended and taught at a class in Shelby County a couple of months ago where that was a very interesting topic. It is cannabis sativa. Marijuana and hemp are the same thing. They look the same, they smell the same. A dog, as I understand it, is not sophisticated enough to tell you why it smells like that. It just knows that it smells like that. So essentially, as these people have said, you've made dogs that were trained to detect marijuana essentially useless, and then created more concerns about what institutes probable cause at the time of a stop.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm trying to figure out then how do we get around that other than either retrain the dogs or, as you said earlier, legalize everything. But there has to be some solution to that. And also, I'm experiencing this in my neighborhoods where there are seemingly unregulated edibles and gummies just placed on the shelf. And my concern is that people are buying these products and not knowing what exactly is in them. Some folks are getting sick and being taken to the hospital and ingesting all kind of things. I think high levels of vitamin E also in some of these products. So my concern is, as we talk about regulation, that we need to look at how can we best, two things. One, make sure that farmers and producers that are doing the right thing and on only having hemp aren't delayed or necessarily having to go through hoops to get their product to market. Secondly, those who are not bringing in these good products and are allowing persons to put these things on the shelves that not only are illegal, but are unhealthy, that we find some way to help you do your job, but also to keep our citizens healthy. Because if someone is ingesting a CBD gummy thinking that it is 90% CBD and 10% something else, but then find out that it's 10% CBD and 80% trash and THC, then they're going to be sick, and then they may be on their job and getting tested and then lose their job because they trusted the store in which they bought this product to be testing it.
Right, that is a great concern. That is something that we are very concerned about. Again, we're at the intersection between investigation and regulation. I get calls practically every day from district attorneys with that same question. We have first addressed plant material because I know I'm going to get over 10,000 examples of plant material in. I'm going to get hundreds of other things, and those are the next things that we're concerned about. If you go back to TBI Crime Lab, I can show you that we've got volumetric flasks with gummy bears in solution. We've got vape cartridges sitting in liquid nitrogen trying to figure out ways to extract these things so we can do further testing. The real question, as you brought up, is with better regulation, should we even be going there?
Yeah, okay. And also, can we get this slide?
Absolutely.
Also? Thank you.
Representative Shaw.
Just one final question, and maybe this should go to the doctors rather than you. Can a person's vital signs weigh in as to how they are tested for THC or whatever? You know, maybe if your blood pressure is a little high, a little low, or whatever, does that weigh in at all as to how a person may be tested and what the results of that test may be?
I can't speak specifically to that, but I can roundabout talk about that and talk about something that was brought up earlier, is that Tennessee does have a 0.08 gram % limit for alcohol. Alcohol is a relatively simple thing to perform testing on and a very simple thing to perform experiments on to see what happens on people. When it comes to levels or per se levels for other drugs, that is a very complicated issue. It's limited by how people use those drugs, what their tolerance are for those drugs, and the ability to perform testing on those drugs on an experimental basis on things such as marijuana. I do know that the Society of Forensic Toxicologists, the International Association of Chief Polices, have come out against any per se levels on marijuana because it is just such a complicated compound. When we issue a tox report from the TBI Crime Lab, we very frequently end up in court to talk about what this means. But we can't take a drug report and say, yes, you were, or no, you were not impaired simply upon that number. It is an aggregation of what the officer saw, how that person behaved in order to draw a conclusion as to whether that person's impaired or not.
Any further questions for this panel? Gentlemen, we appreciate you being with us this afternoon. Your information is most helpful. Thank you. Next on our agenda is Miss Melissa Bast. If you would come forward, please.
Oh, I got mine.
And please just check the microphone, make sure the red light's on, and introduce yourselves to the committee, please.
Thank you, Chairman Reedy and members of the committee. I want to thank you for your time today and bring about some important issues. My name is Melissa Bast, and I became a lobbyist on this issue about 5-6 years ago by default. I have been a proponent of medical cannabis, but somehow ended up on this coming first. So I've seen some of the challenges and the infancy along the way, and I just want to revisit some of those and maybe encourage us to look at some alternatives as we move forward in the legislative session. When we first started this off, and I walked in Chairman Sutherland's office, the word was called industrialized hemp. And that word industrialized was just by definition only, but I really, in my mind, I swallowed the juice. I thought we were talking about concrete, and I thought we were talking about manufacturing and automobiles and Volkswagen, and I thought I was going to be seeing leather in my car soon made out of hemp. But soon we saw that 0.03 loophole became a medicinal market that just opened up, and now we see it has flooded our shelves. We go down Charlotte Avenue, we see furniture places selling it, we see hairdressers selling it, and we see it in our malls being sold in beautiful, kiosks now. But my problem that I saw all along is that we have done a great job in the Department of Ag. They have done a great job in regulating, coming up with rules as they can see this change, but testing still bothers me. And I think that still bothers a lot of you and the public safety issue that comes with testing. Right now, we only test, as the department has stated, for THC, the Delta 9. However, I use these products personally. I took them out to the university, I had them tested, and I wanted to know why this worked on my back and this didn't work. And the scientists told me there was formulas and there was different things. But one thing we do not test that I would love to bring to your attention and hope that we don't go down the same route that we see the vape pens now going down, is we are allowing our public and our consumers to have all these different products, from water to pet products, but we don't know what's in them. We don't know if it's snake oil and somebody's buying a $120 bottle of coconut oil at Green Hill, or whether I'm putting pesticide on my back at night. We don't know what's in it. So I've been trying to do a little homework this summer and see how we could address this in our state so we could give our consumer and maybe law enforcement some public safety that these items are legit. And the other thing I'll address as well is the employer testing issue, because we are not taking these safeguards to make sure that what is in that bottle is actually truly in that bottle. Utah, I saw, was a state that recently came out and they said, you know what, we're going to do it different in Utah. While we're waiting on the FDA to do something, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do our own standards, because we don't want somebody getting sick off of hemp. We don't want somebody getting sick off of products that are legal, that they're trying to help them. So what they did was they created a mandate. Instead of like our department, they have stated that they encourage all these processors to get third-party testing, but it's not required, y'all. I think we need to look at, when we go into session in 2020, maybe requiring. I think that would set us alone as a quality product. We need to make sure that in the supply channel that we have quality assurance to our public and those that are taking these. For one, we don't know if somebody, an older person, is taking these that have other health ramifications, and that's another fold in this. I'd love to see incentives done that allow our research to be done in our universities. This plan is so complicated, and we don't know all the good things. Middle Tennessee State University, I know Dr. Elliott, the last we spoke last year, was working on a patent for Crohn's disease that they were making remarkable research on out there. So I'll conclude a little bit, but I'd like to see this. I'd like to see you all take a step in testing. They are testing for heavy metals, toxins, pesticides, contaminants, and THC, and making sure that they have a level. Once it's tested, they put a label on there and a QVR code so that that individual can pull up that QVR code and they can see exactly what has been tested, what is in that bottle, and they can get quality assurance, because it was reported just in the last 30 days, this was an industry that brought in $591 million in 2018. Any industry that has that kind of numbers is going to have bad players, and therefore you're going to have synthetics and things getting to market that we don't know what's in them. So I would encourage you to move forward with additional, not just encourage third-party testing, but require third-party testing so we know these things are safe for the public. But the second thing I'd like to address is I'd like to go back and talk about industrialized hemp. Industrialized hemp, I think, is where Tennessee could stand out. I think we've lost the ball here a little bit with all these products that have saturated the market. But I do see Volkswagen doing research and development. I do see manufacturers in our state needing to be educated. We make plastics, we make all kinds of items, rope, jeans, concretes. Can we not find some kind of incentives that they use our Tennessee farmers and have long-term contracts? We've been talking about all these ingestibles and products and things, but I bet barely anybody in this committee has heard of the word graphing. Hemp is being used for graphing, which is battery charging now. I'd like to see Volkswagen come up here and give you a presentation and have tons of contracts for our farmer with the longevity. Because whether this is snake oil or not, our university studies and the public and protecting them in their own research will find it out. But what I'm concerned about is having farmers, which I'll introduce you to, gentleman here today, Mr. Pope, that have longevity in this state. If they take the time to invest in this and they take the time to grow their business into a new crop, let's go ahead and make sure they have the longevity of long-term contracts that manufacturers here are using our Tennessee farmers and not bringing it in from other states or from China, including Volkswagen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Nicely, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We actually toyed with the bill in the Senate that would create something, a Tennessee hemp. You know, we have Tennessee milk and Tennessee different things, Tennessee whiskey. And in order to be a Tennessee hemp, it would be tested for the heavy metals and the pesticides and purity and concentrations, all this stuff. We never could, you know, session moved fast, we couldn't get the bugs worked out. And there was some in the hemp industry that didn't like my idea. And I'm a little slow, and after the session was over, I figured why they didn't like it. They didn't like it because they were bringing in hemp from out of state. So I think we need to take another look at Tennessee hemp. David, put that on your list, sir, and write that down. We need to figure out, and the people that use hemp, they want the purest of the pure. They want everything right. They don't want any heavy metals. They don't want any pesticides. They want it to be just right. And if we could come up with a way, if some of you deep thinkers would help me come up with a way to pass a bill and where we could ensure the consumer that this was indeed raised in Tennessee and it doesn't have any heavy metals and the CBD is where it's supposed to be, I think it'd be good. You know, the South's hot right now. Everybody wants about the South. Tennessee's the hottest place in the South. It's hot. Nashville is the hottest place in Tennessee. Everybody wants to come to Nashville. They come from all over the world to come to Nashville. Everything Tennessee is good right now. We need to capitalize on that. So if we could come up with some way to ensure the consumer that they're getting the best of the best, that it didn't come in here from China and build this Tennessee, I think it'd be good for the producers in Tennessee and the consumer.
And if I may add one more point on the testing, I heard many times from Senator Briggs today and things about the employer testing. I got calls from the middle of the night from FedEx pilots who were in jeopardy of their jobs and things, and I didn't want to be a part of some kind of, you know, collateral punishment on people. That is another thing that if we do this quality testing, people can take CBD oil, but ensure that it's 0% THC, because anything that you take for any duration is going to build up in your cells, and it's cannabis. Whether we call it hemp, whether we call it industrialized, it can form in the cells, and people are testing positive no matter how much they're following the rules. So I think this testing thing would also allow 0 THC, and that way you could open up the consumer protection laws that if people are buying this and they are taking it thinking there's no 0 THC, and they do lose their job, they have some recourse. I think processors and manufacturers ought to be regulated to ensure that this quality testing is in place, and if they don't, and they're selling damaged, you know, snake oil goods, then somebody, the consumer, has some recourse to go back to as well, because nobody should be using their jobs to follow the law.
Looks like we've got a big conversation headed to the Department of Health, but Chairman Smith, please.
Thanks, Ms. Bass. If you would direct us toward a definition of medical marijuana.
I would say the best definition would probably be what we find through what has come out with our science reports and things recently at the federal level that did kind of go into some of the characteristics that we could recommend cannabis to be used for. But medical cannabis, I feel, I don't know where the best direct the definition when there's so many definitions out there, but I've always been a proponent of medical cannabis just because I feel cannabis is cannabis. We can call it hemp, we can call it industrialized hemp, but there's 540 compounds of that plant, and I think it's an amazing plant that we haven't even begun to study or see the research. But the employer issue, that's definitely an issue.
Just to follow up, the reason I ask is I'm a proponent of the study. I'm a proponent. I've given, as a nurse, I've given medical marijuana, Marinol. But what I'm hearing is when different interests come into my office now as a legislator, they're advocating for the use of medical marijuana, but no one can point me to a prospective randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study that show if I take medical marijuana with my Claritin every day, this is the side effect profile I'm going to have. If I take medical marijuana with my blood thinner every day, this is the side effect profile. We're missing a lot of information, and that's very important in the scope of medical treatment, because if it's going to be something incorporated into therapy, and the treatment of pain and the treatment of people with long-term diseases, we need to know that concomitant use. And I'm just looking for, and if there doesn't exist a true definition accepted by the body of literature in the scientific community, I'd like to know that too, but I can't find a definition of medical marijuana.
I know there was a science academy, Dr. Terry, you might be able to help, where they came up with 4 conditions that were readily accepted that they had done testing on, and I can furnish you, I do have that study and could drop it by your office.
At this time, I think we could segue right into what Senator Nicely had said to Mr. Pop, and go ahead and introduce your guest there, Melissa.
Gentlemen, I'll let him go ahead. This is Mr. Pope, Mike Pope. He's from Murrayville, and he is doing everything in hemp, from growing it to processing it to manufacturing it. So I thought he would be a good person to ask some questions to.
I'm Mike Pope from Maryville. We've got 2 production facilities. One, did I get that wrong?
Yeah.
One in Maryville and one in Greenback, and we've grown flower. I guess Dad opened a business in the early 70s, so we've been 40-something years growing flowers and vegetable transplants. But we got into the hemp last May. Got into it late. We propagate about 5 million annual cuttings a year, so the cloning was harder than some of the stuff we do, but it was kind of old hat to us. So we propagated the plants. We actually sold several this spring, and we planted 15 acres in the ground, and we planted 5,000 in 5-gallon pots, which I'm more used to growing and more comfortable with. And it turned out well, and I helped there's a lot of people in this that haven't been into farming or trying to get back into farming, and my phone rings constantly with, well, what's wrong with it now? You know, my number since we signed up to Extract got posted on the Tennessee website, so I get calls from all over the country sometimes, but it's been good for us. It's moving forward. We're just now getting into the extraction of any kind of size, and what we're going to do is to testing. We start testing every variety we have about the 2nd week of August, and we test it every week so we know what's in it as it's coming along. That way we know we will harvest it before it were to get hot. And we're also looking for the high CBD count, and kind of lost my train there. That comes later. You can't really test a flower and find pesticide residuals that I know of. The only time I've seen it is after you make the crude, after you extract it and then distill the alcohol back out of it.
The processing.
Yeah, when you're processing is when you find that. That's the big scare for me, for being a processor, to buying hemp from somebody that you don't know what they've done. So you would almost have to take some and extract it, get it tested. That tests about $600-700 to get that heavy metals, pesticides, the full range. And we use 3 different labs, and we compare them all. Haven't had much variance. Actually, we use 4, 2 in Tennessee and 1 in Oregon and 1 in Colorado, just trying to cover all the bases to make sure that we're right. And when we go to market, we will have a QR code on the bottle that you can just take your phone and stick it to it, and it'll take you to, right now we're using Confident Cannabis, which does it for several labs. It's just a database. It'll tell you exactly what's in it. The only issue I see when it comes to Delta 9, it says LOQ. That's just below, it has to be above .04 before they'll post it. If it's .03 or less, then it just says LOQ, so I'm afraid people would think there's none in it, but it's
Right.
going to be .03 or less.
We have a couple members that would like to ask some questions, and maybe we'll gather some more information. Senator Nicely?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, I heard there's all kinds of rumors going around, and you don't know if any of what's true and what's not true, but I heard that last year the producer had raised some hemp on a tobacco patch, and the tobacco patch had been sprayed 2 years before with something, and he sold his crop to the processor, and it turned up hot, not for THC, but for this, I guess, a herbicide that had been put on the field 2 years before. Well, not only did he not get paid for his crop, the processors in the contract sued him for loss of market share. So not only did the farmer not make any money, he ended up costing him a lot of money. So there's not much good land that hasn't had herbicides on it in the last, or insecticides or fungicides or something on in the last few years. So have you heard anything about that?
I know it will pull it out of the ground and store it. You hear a lot of talk about Roundup or Glyphor, now, and maybe that one stays around longer than others. I don't know. But we're growing, I grew mine beside hydrangeas, and we've used chemicals there before, and that nothing has come from that.
But do you test for it? Do you test
Yes.
for herbicides? What does that test cost?
Well, that's part of that $600 package. But now just on the flower, I've not. That's once we get down to making something with it.
Tell us again what that $600 package tests for.
All your cannabinoids, THC, CBD, all the other CBN, CBGs, there's a slew of them. And it goes through about, I'd say 60 or 80 different pesticides and fungicides. And finally, the heavy metal test takes about a week to run.
It sounds like a pretty good test.
Wow. It's thorough. If you get through that one, you're in pretty good shape.
Who does that test now?
They can do it down in Chattanooga. They can do it at Galbraith in Knoxville, or Altitude in Colorado, or Trace in Oregon. It's the people that we've used.
Thanks a lot.
Representative Shaw. I got it. Anyone else? As Representative Hurt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you see processors or extractors, I guess, because I think we could clarify with an extractor will probably extract the crude, and then maybe a processor, I don't know if my terminology is right, takes it to the next level of getting it ready to be put on the shelf. Would that be fair to, or do I have my terminology?
This is about a lot like the plant business and why it's not been able to be taken over by a few big people. There's a lot of people who could do it. There's a lot of different levels of quality. And some processors that are doing this $10,000 a day or 25,000 pounds an hour or all that stuff, they're selling crude to the big makers, I guess, to whoever's Avon or whomever does it. And some of them will go all the way to isolate, which is just taking that same crude and just taking it through distillate. Then they put it in a reactor to come up with 100% CBD. Most things, as far as benefits of the hemp, is better with the full spectrum, but it still has the THC issue with it.
So I guess I'm referring to, if we go back to the extraction, they take the plant in from the farmer and they extract the CBD, and then they're going to sell to the next person if they don't take it further. But my question would be, should those businesses be concerned at some point under their roof that product becomes more concentrated before it's broken back down to be above the 0.03 or 0.3, whichever? Is there a time during the process from getting it from the farmer before you sell it to the person who will make the end product? Is there a concern during that time period that they could have a product on their hands that would be high in THC?
They are.
Okay. And I ask that question because is that something, is legislatively, we need to have the discussion to address for those industries, while it's under their roof, there's some sort of protection while they take it from the plant to the end product, to the crude. I just want to make sure we address all issues that law enforcement could see, or farmers, or, business owners could see during this process of getting to the end product.
It gets, like our last one was like 0.9.
Gotcha. And then you
But
take
it can't go out at 0.9.
Got you. So it is
I haven't
something.
seen anything out yet, though, so but yeah, it'll go back way below.
Right.
But I've not seen anything even close to 0.3.
Got you. So
0.03.
legislatively, we could have discussions to address that issue, getting that product to where it needs to be from the field to where it needs to be safe to be sold to the next step.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. Just wanted to ask that question, clarify. Thank you.
Any further questions for our guests? We appreciate your testimony today, and
Thank you, Chairman.
watch your email. If we have another task force meeting, you may want to come back.
Thank you, Chairman.
Next on our agenda, I'm happy to see our TSU folks here, and it's Mr. Kumar. If you want to come up and let us know what's on your mind and what TSU is doing. Just check your microphone, make sure the red light's on, and introduce yourselves for the record, please.
While he's, I don't know if the mic is on. While he's setting up, Mr. Kumar, I'm going to make a couple of comments. My name is Chandra Reddy. I'm the Dean for the College of Agriculture at Tennessee State University. It has been a very useful exercise for us to be here and listening to all of the post-harvest issues and the regulatory concerns in this business. But we're going to take you back to the production side and the agronomic issues with this crop. TSU, along with the Farm Bill in 2018, we kind of given so much interest in the community, and I know talking to Senator Nicely and the Chairman Reedy and others, we kind of got into it last crop season, and we quickly put together a team of experts in different areas, ranging from agronomy, the breeding, and some of the issues we're talking about, heavy metal extraction problems with this crop, and then the non-THC, non-CBD products we could develop from this crop. So it was a variety of expertise we put together into a team. But here, we got some of them here, but we try to limit and give you some ideas about what so far we came up with, what we plan to do regarding this crop. And we kind of get just quickly about 10 different slides and give you some ideas. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I proceed? So we have started industrial hemp program in early 2018, and we had not much information, even some research data that was available for CBD production or other uses was very limited. So we have taken bottom-up approach to identify what is the immediate and future concern of the farmers or the different stakeholders that we have to address. So we have been really benefited by the group of farmers, TNHI, Tennessee Hemp Industries Association. And this was our first meeting in which Honorable Jay Reddy was there, and he guided and gave us some idea about this project. So we organized a monthly meeting of the different farmers, business personnel, and we collect the end survey data to revisit our goal and what is the immediate concern or future need for them. So some of the prime concern that we have identified and we need to address it immediately was to find a suitable hemp cultivar, not only for the CBD, but for the fiber and dual purposes also, for grain. And second was to identify there was not much information on how to produce it, how we can get the best yield, because there are so many technical complexities are attached to it. when you go for CBD production, there are several abiotic and biotic factors that can increase or decrease the cannabinoid profile. It means it can increase the CBD profile, cannabinoids with delta 9 THC. And it can be like pH, soil quality, moisture level, stress level, because cannabinoid produce as a defense mechanism. So any kind of stress can increase that or decrease that. So there are individual effects or there can be combination of effects. So we have to establish there are several factors after harvesting. How we harvest that can also affect that. And the third was there was loss of, initially when we organized that first meeting, 70% haven't seen the hemp plants, how it is. So we started to disseminate the right information, because there are lots of information available that is just a colloquial or anecdote. So we are trying to go how rationally, scientifically we can provide these data to the farmers. Right now, we are evaluating 10 different varieties. That is not limited to CBD. We are trying fiber varieties, evaluating fiber varieties, and some of the grain varieties. Some of these seeds are registered that we got from the Siavi Seed Company from Kentucky. And we have very interesting, we have found some interesting data, and observation is that some of the plants really perform very well without any kind of fertilizer or using any kind of chemical pesticide or something. But we also found that there was, these are our crops in the last year field, and they were performed fantastically. These are some flowers that and then we screen the plants which grow well on the basis of germination percentage, on the basis of establishment, and how the cannabinoid profile was stable. So we screened some of them, and we continued with like 2 or 3 more trials. So we have also observed there are not many disease or pests right now. Hemp is prone because it's a new crop. So, but we found that few fiber varieties in the patches, because we have randomized block design. And we found that only one variety that was registered, it is Eleta campana, that is for fiber and grain purposes. And we found 70% of this plant is died because of that at maturity stage. This is a fungal disease, and this was very prevalent in the field. And it didn't affect, interestingly, it didn't affect any plant CBD varieties or like high CBD variety or other varieties. This is also one of the common problem in Tennessee we have observed. This is hemp russet mite. It doesn't kill the plant, but it reduces the CBD content. And if heavily affected, it can kill the plants. This is aphid problem we have observed in greenhouse. It may be due to the humidity control or temperature is not controlled in the greenhouse or indoor system. So we have also observed, and this was basically affected the high CBD variety that we had in our greenhouse. So what are the challenges, and what could be done in this for the hemp industry? This is the hemp industry fact book data after 2018 Farm Bill. It suggests that the biggest problem that the hemp farmer faced is finding a processor. This is the problem because they start with very enthusiastically, but they don't know how to end up their product. There are so many uses, and this is not only the concern that finding a processor, but the concern is how to get that predetermined or the price control, because price is very volatile, and lots of farmers, they complain they never get that price initially when they bought the clones or they bought the seed. And our survey data says that after each event, we take the survey of the farmers or participants. Interestingly, it was more than 45% farmers said that the biggest problem was finding a clone, finding a good variety that can give the stable CBD production was they claim before selling that. And there are also some of the problem is that federal laws and interventions that have been discussed earlier. And pest and weed pressure, right now there are no much weed and weed pressure is there, but pest pressure, but it will come up when production will increase, or it will depend on the what is the source of the seed or the clones where it come from. And the banking services is also very prevalent, insurance and getting loan from the farmers. That we have discussed in TNHI meeting, and they will better able to talk about that. So there are CBD market will increase. There is a hemp industry daily. They have done the market research, and they found till 2023 the hemp CBD market will go up to $7.5 billion. That's true. That's right now it's exponentially increasing. But we have to look how diverse this crop is, how much it can be beneficial for the economy, how for a agrarian economy like Tennessee has wonderful land that can grow industrial hemp, and what kind of products it can give that will be not only supporting the economy but environment as well. So personal care product also has good market. Before legalization, United States was importing high personal care products mostly from China, Canada, and some of them from Europe. Industrial application, we can use it so many. Right now, enlisted products are more than 25,000. So I'm unable to count them, but there are several products, and still we have to discover that. And fiber products is, it can be compared with flax, and Dr. Wu can comment on that. And there are also the environmental. Right now, the biggest concern is the climate change and how this crop can be a scapegoat to provide some of the sustainable solution for that. Phytoremediation, it is exhaustive crop. It can take all the toxic, it can uptake all the toxic matter. And the problem is that we have to establish also the research data on that, which part have the more, like apical parts have the more like heavy metals or pesticide, but it is stored in the different parts. So we have to do research on that, like which special part has the what kind of compound they restore. Our one of the professor has done research, and they found this crop can survive highest heavy metal concentration up to. We have 3 trials, 25 ppm to 100 ppm, and one of our variety Tigra, they survived 100 ppm. That is extreme to cultivate any plants, and all of majority percentage has to be still decide that that research is going on. So when we compare this, this can provide the ethanol by biodiesel, and if some of the research they compared with the corn, they found it can produce twice the amount of ethanol than as compared to corn. And the other thing was that the paper industry, this crop usually take 90 days to long term, if we say like 120 or 140 days. And 1 acre of hemp is viable to replace the 4 acre of wood tree that grown in 20 years. So in itself, how sustainable it is and how we can use that. We have to incentivize these research, and we have to also do some kind of research that the product viability. And this is, as I said, it's a very low input crop. We didn't use any kind of organic, like no fertilizer, no irrigation. Last year we had good rainfall. This year it was pretty dry, so we have done 1 irrigation. So we didn't use that, but we still got very phenomenal crop. So it can be grown on one of the marginal land. Even if we are not growing for the CBD, we can grow for the fiber. Thank you very much, Doctor. We'll proceed.
So,
You can skip that. We'll do a quick comment. Okay, you can skip. Since we didn't have enough chairs, section on TSU's genetic and capabilities in terms of greenhouse evaluation. DNA fingerprinting is needed to differentiate named clones from each other and to develop and track new varieties of industrial hemp. Molecular markers, which is the laboratory that I lead, has that potential and can be used to distinguish in early stages the gender of the plants, whether there are male plants that are going to contaminate feminized seed field. So this just shows in a clockwise direction a test where we are evaluating previous selections that were just described, the 10 varieties, and how they're allowed to open pollinate and then collect seed in a mock breeding program where a greenhouse trial can then be used for DNA collection and tissue testing. With that, you see that we can determine flowers early on, especially when the pots are small, smaller than what a producer would use. And all plants can be sampled and labeled with both a gender and a plant ID, and then used in DNA extraction. DNA extraction is very easy nowadays. You all probably know about it from ancestry kits. That's a liquid sample that you collect from a cheek swab. With plants, it's similar to what the evaluation for THCs and CBDs were, which is dry the tissue on silica gel. When you dry it on silica gel, you can dry it overnight and then store it for a long time, and it's useful still for the DNA extraction. Next slide. So with this next slide, no, back. The next slide would show fingerprinting capacities for hemp at TSU in terms of the ag biotechnology laboratories that we have there in the College of Agriculture. We have robotic DNA extraction and tissue culture rooms and capacity for high throughput DNA marker amplification and fingerprinting. This starts with kits that are available for the DNA. In some cases, there might be a savings compared to the chemical analysis, but we see it more as complementary to the actual chemical analysis because you can look at the genes underlying the production of some of the compounds that will be in the final varieties. On the left, you can see that the type of marker, which is the same type of marker used in these ancestry kits, are SNPs. They uncover most differences between strains. They're also useful to evaluate the hemp sex chromosome. Hemp is unique in having, as a plant, a male and a female. Corn, you would have the male and female on the same plant. And in some cases, based on this chromosome segregation, just like in humans, you get XX or XY plants. That's what's shown in the databasing component. So DNA extraction starts the circle. Molecular marker assays, CAS markers showing a picture of the laboratory is a fast and easy method that can be ramped up quickly. And then that fingerprints with single nucleotide assays using some of the larger machines like you see in the bottom right-hand corner. And all of that could be databased to discover those genes that are important for Tennessee adaptation and for quality traits. If we're talking fiber, if we're talking CBD products, and there are some private companies that are now offering this service. These are suggested to complement the commercially available ones from medicinal genomics and public sector markers being designed at Cornell University and Oregon State University for production of CBD from industrial hemp plants. The ideal markers would come from genes involved in flowering or heat tolerance or responses to drought and insect infestation. And there's gender-specific markers. I'll end just by saying that there's networking going on with multi-state variety trials that are from some of those states like Oregon, Kentucky, New York, and Alabama. And the overall goal
goal would be to have a DNA extraction technique from either the dry leaf tissue or from crude lysates would be the liquid part of the plant, and that could be used in a DNA test. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your testimony. Any members have any?
Sorry, and
please go ahead.
It's my part.
Oh, okay.
Well, we need to continue because it covers a lot of questions from both sides, because we feel as a food scientist, we feel the current needs. We can like recognize the needs from consumers. They need more CBD products, and for stakeholders, they expressed desire. They express desire to to marketing these CBD products in food and dietary supplements. But CBD products nowadays, they have lots of issues and answer questions regarding health benefits, like what exactly health benefits they have, and what kind of level we can use in products to guarantee the safety issues for consumers, and what's the standardization protocols, for example, for processing, what to detect, what compound to determine. It's to make sure like it's good for food and dietary supplement consumption. So there are lots of unanswered questions. Here we are here. We have a great team to help get the research done to answer those questions. And now we have some work in progress. As you know, we have two streamlines. Hemp are not mainly produced for CBDs. They are also produced for oil and fiber. So we have one PhD student working on this variety Futura 75 to analyze other than its seed oil, which is benefit for health, comparable with flaxseed oil. And what's the leftover from the seed meal, we can also generate some value by extracting those proteins and soluble dietary fibers. And those are great potentials alternatives for food industry, used as great ingredients. At the other streamline, we are working on hemp plants, which are produced for flower and plant leaves to extract CBD oils. This variety we use is cherry. And we monitor the CBD change during extraction and processing because, as you know, it's mentioned before, THC, and there is another compound, THCA, can be converted into THC after heating, right? So we try to see what's the change of those key components during processing and storage, and also like what level we should put into our product to guarantee its health benefit instead of other adverse effects. We are trying to develop some beverages and powders to look at in that perspective. And also, we can also generate some novel ingredients from the leftovers after extraction. So that's another side beyond CBD. So we are doing a lot of work, and I hope this work can contribute to the public. Yes.
Is it my turn now? Great presentation. I always appreciate the folks at Tennessee State University and the work that you're doing on this. It does mean a lot to us at the state level, but also the state of Tennessee, because this is important information that we all need to know about to move forward. Representative Love, would you like to make a comment? I know you're a big fan of this university.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman. I can't think of any better way to celebrate homecoming week at Tennessee State than to have you all here presenting on this research. I'm just really blown away by what's going on, and I thank you, Chairman, for the help you've given the university over the years, and also Senator Nicely with support from the General Assembly. I'm very interested in the research because I know we talked about the safety issues come up several times, and just trying to find ways that we can make sure that the consumers are protected. And we've had discussions up here just while we're in the committee about how to make sure that as we have an increased volume of products coming to market, that we can have some way to make sure that persons are safe and that the farmers are protected also. And so I'm grateful for your help in this area and look forward to what the research will yield. Thank you.
Any questions further? Thank you for being here with us this afternoon, and we look forward to more research that you find out for the state of Tennessee. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Senator, come on down. So last on our agenda is the Tennessee Association of Hemp. If you folks would like to move forward. And just make sure your red light on your microphone is on so you can introduce yourselves to the committee.
You want to go first?
Nope, you lead.
Okay. My name's Joe Kirkpatrick. I'm currently president of the Tennessee Hemp Industries Association, but our president-elect, Frederick Coffin's here, if he would stand and be recognized. Fred's going to be taking over for the next 3 years, our trade association. It's been a pleasure to serve as the leader of the trade association, but as everybody knows, I'm probably best suited to be an advocate, and will be continuing my role as president and CEO of the Tennessee Growers Coalition, which is a political action committee dedicated to the hemp industry. I sort of bring, anybody that's been to our chapter meetings knows that I sort of bring the 30,000-foot view. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an attorney. I'm barely a farmer. If you've seen my crop this year, you know what I'm talking about. But I do want to address the federal rules. Senator Nicely was able to deliver from me directly to USDA General Counsel Stephen Vaden in regard to the forthcoming federal rules, and I simply asked for two things, and that would be, one, the federal allowance for the movement of hemp-derived concentrates from a duly registered or licensed hemp products manufacturer to another for the purpose of reconstitution of that extract into products that are compliant for public consumption, in other words, below 0.3% THC. Right now, there's presently no federal or state laws, and it's a great liability, and honest people are being exposed to a great deal of risk because of that, and hopefully, and we appreciate TBI and state law enforcement's forbearance in allowing us to do that in the state. But obviously, if we want to deal interstate with other companies and we start crossing state lines, then that becomes a whole different issue, and that needs to be clearly, hopefully they'll address that with the federal rules. The second thing, and I think law enforcement would also be pleased to hear that I'm asking them federally to cap the THCA level to 1.0% federally to prevent, well, from the industry standpoint, is to prevent a total collapse of the high CBD genetics markets, because primarily if you do apply post-decarboxylation, which may be required by the feds, we don't know, ultimately, when these rules come down, that would take about 95% or greater of our high CBD genetics out of commission. So the industry, as we know it, would be this growth from 200 growers to 4,000 growers would be back to almost no growers. So at least not for the profitable component, which is right now the cannabinoid extraction. And I'll address the fiber and seed components here shortly. But from law enforcement standpoint, this would prevent bad actors in the industry, because as our good friends from TSU can tell us, is that genetics can be either changed by breeding or genetically modified, and Clint can actually speak to that more greatly. There could be strains of hemp that are below 0.3% Delta 9 and could have 15 or 20% THCA. So in a decarboxylation, from a post-decarboxylation standpoint, that is a product that will definitely get people high. So we would definitely want to bring that to the state's attention, run a bill that would cap it in-state if we're allowed to continue with the post-decarboxylation rules. So we want to, but there are always bad actors in every industry, and we don't deny that. So, and then to move, I'm going to move from subject to subject pretty quickly because a lot's been covered here. To address the testing procedures mentioned by Ms. Bast, I think that one way to take the vast majority of improperly labeled synthetics, pesticide, and metals-laced products is to take a hard look at overseas product, particularly Chinese product. And much of that problem will be mitigated. We're not saying that standards shouldn't be in place, but the vast majority of Tennessee and American farmers are doing their dead level best to be compliant. And anything other than that is really, quite frankly, and this is my opinion, is an outlier. So, I mean, it's talk about statistically insignificant things is the number of hemp farmers trying to skirt regulations. They're all trying to be, they're all trying to do this right and make this a profitable and safe business. And I think Senator Nicely's idea to allow Tennessee hemp farmers to use the Pick Tennessee products bug and logo and things on their products is a great idea. I think not only will it help sell them here at home, but I think it will also help us sell them globally because Tennessee is definitely a brand, has a great brand. So we want to do that. Tennessee is not only leading nationally and globally in this industry, and that's in large thanks to our legislature, our governor, and our previous governor and previous commissioner of agriculture, including the current one, Commissioner Hatcher, and all of the fine civil servants that work at the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. They've done an amazing job of making this, again, we've seen nearly 2,000% growth in applications year over year to grow hemp. And that's not only because of Tennessee growers wanting to grow more, that is because of out-of-state companies that are wanting to come here and out-of-country international companies coming here. For instance, I just recently entertained the COO of Leviathan Cannabis from Ontario, Toronto, Ontario, on a tour of some local farms, and they're presently building an extraction plant in Smith County, which is slated to process 380,000 pounds of hemp in 2020. So the jobs that are coming here, the bottom line to the economy, the bottom line to revenue collection, it's all going to be amazing. Tennessee is the first in several areas. We're the first to allow farm-to-table use of hemp as animal feed as long as it's not sold in the commercial feed supply. And the resulting produce is disclaimed as long as it's disclaimed as adulterated by hemp. And we think that adulteration is the selling point because who wouldn't want free-range hemp eggs, hemp-fed chicken, beef, pork, and all that in-state are legal. And again, you know, if we can get the FDA on board to recognize hemp as generally recognized as safe, give it that certification for the food supply, we can really make a lot of progress on the other forms of hemp other than the flower CBD cannabinoid business. Then we are also the first to define smokable hemp and make it illegal for minors to purchase or possess hemp products intended for smoking. We're also the first to consider an excise tax on smokable hemp product at a level consistent with tobacco products, which passed the House this year and was rolled to Senate Ag for further consideration in 2020. We have a drug testing bill already that's been addressed by some of the panel members. And we're simply waiting for data to provide a reasonable standard. Presently, the standard for THC that's allowable in the blood is 50 nanograms per milliliter. If anybody can possibly think of something smaller than 50 nanograms, you know how small a milliliter is. A 1 ounce bottle of CBD is 30 milliliters. So take 1/30th of that and imagine is it a trillionth or is a nano a billionth? I think a nano is a billionth. So 1 billionths of a gram contained in a milliliter is how much you would have to have in your blood to fail a drug screen for THC. So potentially people affected in employment most prolifically under the Tennessee Drug-Free Workplace Standards, which doesn't allow any state contract or any company that does state contracting to hire anybody that would fail such a test. Also, DCS cases would be affected where either the parents or children are taking compliant products, people on probation or parole, student athletes. The list goes on and on and on to people that could take compliant products that would still fail a test. We're bringing back the seizure and forfeiture bill we've had on notice and later withdrawn for the last 2 sessions that needs to be reconsidered. It exempts hemp by definition from all seizure and forfeiture laws on the books and removes the smell of cannabis as a primary cause for the search of a vehicle or property. That has been thrown out of a state court in Pennsylvania and has been overturned by the Maryland Supreme Court in decisions both in 2019. We could potentially, in combination with the smokable tax, where funds could be used to pay for roadside testing kits, which we've talked about, purchase mass spectrometry equipment for TBI, which they desperately need, and offset losses to law enforcement's pool of forfeiture funds, which is a viable, it's off budget, but they use it for funding their cars and their equipment and their dogs and all that stuff. So, we don't want to see them lose funding as a result of this bill. So, but the industry's support of this tax or lack thereof for this legislation is still up in the air. And will most likely be based upon how any such funds would be allocated. In other words, we have no interest in a tax that simply goes into the state's general fund. We would want to see programs like Tennessee State's research, Agent Farmers Drug Task Force programs and things like that, keeping kids from smoking tobacco and taking heroin and things like that. So we would want to see those used properly. Right now, if only 1,000 pounds of smokable hemp, and that's a very small amount, were sold weekly in Tennessee at an average of $8 a gram, the excise tax would generate approximately $4 million annually. So if we, so again, is it a sin to smoke hemp? I'm not here to judge that. I'm not an ordained minister either. That's another profession I don't have. So, but let's talk about bioremediation of land and waterways. Hemp is a soil chelator. I'm presently working on a project called Hemp for Water to remediate algae blooms in Florida and Louisiana. Lake Pontchartrain and Lake Okeechobee are now broadly considered unsafe for public use because of toxic algae and runoff of pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, which not only contaminate the groundwater and kill the natural flora, which is detrimental to fishing as well as the recreational use of our lakes, waterways, and beaches. We often differ about climate change, but runoff from row cropping is so evident that these algae blooms can be seen from space. Hemp is a market-based solution for environmental remediation without the need for economically crippling carbon taxes, which should play well to our vast Republican majority in our state legislature. Replacement of tobacco with a non-addictive and arguably non-carcinogenic smokable products. Hemp can be used as part of a nicotine cessation program by individuals. The long-term prospects for farmers, though, and tobacco particularly and specialty crop farmers, are, again, through use of research by universities like TSU, MTSU, UT, would be of the development of genetics that express other genetics such as CBG, CBN, CBC, CBL, because really the row crop farmer is essentially going to take over CBD in the next 2 to 3 years. But the great thing for farmers long term is that there are how many cannabinoids, expressible cannabinoids?
160.
160 expressible cannabinoids in cannabis, other than THC. So there's going to be a craft and specialty market for all of these cannabinoids. Right now, CBG is the big one. Clint, how much is a kilo of CBG isolate?
$25,000 to $35,000.
$25,000 to $35,000. So if a person had a crop this year that was 10% CBG, they'd be looking at
a lot of money.
$150,000 an acre, maybe. So those, and obviously as these new the next cannabinoid comes on, the price comes down. And that, we see that with CBD this year. We see that with hemp in general is coming down, and just like any other economically based commodity. But ultimately, fiber crops can be used to replace almost all, and this was mentioned by TSU, pine pulpwood-based paper. It takes 20 to 30 years for trees to grow. Hemp fiber is started and harvested within 120 days. Imagine all the bathroom tissue, diapers made from hemp, all the petroleum-based plastics replaced by biodegradable hemp plastics, hemp-based ethanol instead of the poor economy of making ethanol from our food supply. Hemp seed meal as a replacement for soy protein. Hemp seed meal is one of the most nutritionally complete plant-based food sources with the perfect balance of omegas, copious quantities of vitamins and trace minerals necessary for human health. And hemp seed meal doesn't modulate estrogen levels like soy. So for men who don't want to add to their, parts, the food supply would no longer be a factor. So that's where I'm going to stop and turn it over to Clint. And afterwards, I'm certainly available for any questioning.
Thanks for having us here today, y'all. It's good to get in front of y'all and talk hemp. Enjoy it every time, so thanks for that opportunity. Clint Palmer. I'm here with Tennessee Hemp Industry Association. I've been up here every single year working to get hemp as a farmable crop for our farmers, and now we've got the situation that we're in now where we've got a lot of farms growing it, and we're not really sure where to go with a lot of the aspects of the industry, but that's where, talking with law enforcement and working with legislatures, we're going to be able to get to a point where this industry is going to succeed regardless. A couple quick issues that I have. We've seen the growth. We know that farmers are going to be able to make some money, but one of the few things we have to worry about is this standardization of the industry, and we talk clones and seedlings and things like that. Clones, typically, if done correctly, are always going to be about the same. So you have issues with pests, but cannabinoid levels generally are going to be the same. If you buy sweetened or late Sue clones, if they are what they say they are, they're going to be the same. But there's differences within the seed market. So there's really good seed out there. There's really bad seed. And when you get into the bad seed, you really get into looking at what cannabis can do as far as genetics. It can go from a really stable crop to a really unstable crop in one generation. So we see that. We have farmers that purchased seed this year that they should never have purchased, much less ever have planted. Good seed can cost you about $1 a seed, but some of these folks are buying $1 a seed that should never have been considered $1 a seed. They got males in there, so we provided seed to a lot of farmers this year with the average of 1 in 4,000 being a male. That's quality seed. But if 80% are female and 20% are not, and you're selling it as feminized, that's a huge issue. Another thing that goes into the seed market is those discrepancies within the chemical composition of it. So being that it's a great market for people to get into and sell that seed, it's definitely a seller's market, and people are taking advantage of that. So they're selling what I would consider unstable seed, not just by phenotypical expression, meaning what you see in the plant, but rather what's chemically there in the plant. So we have people that bought seed this year that was higher in THC than it should have been. That's just improper breeding. It has nothing to do with what they portrayed to the farmer. We used to have within the program seed importation, and what that meant was that to bring seed into the state, you had to provide that it came from a hemp farm or wherever it came from, that it was a licensed hemp farm, and then you also had to provide a COA or a lab analysis showing that it was less than 0.3%. We've currently gotten away from that, and we're allowing seed to come into the state without any scrutiny at all. And with our Delta 9 limitation rather than total THC, we are going to have people abusing that. I guarantee you any regulatory framework we put up, there's going to be people that abuse it, but the opportunities with them abusing the open seed rights and limitations in the state, not only are we going to have people bringing in bad seed that could be considered marijuana, but we're also going to see people bringing in seed from certain breeders and then breeding with it or taking propagative cuttings from it and working against what that seed breeder would allow. And so with that being said, seed breeders are in a tough place right now in the industry. Like me, myself, I would not want to produce any seed right now and put it into the Tennessee industry because of what people could do with it, and basically they could take your work and run with it. So one of the things moving forward I'd like to see, if we can't do it through regulatory framework within the Department of Agriculture, is maybe us having a bill that kind of encompasses a lot of these different things, what seed being one of them. Move on from that. It's been spoken of a couple times today about processors. There's a huge gray area. We spoke about it a lot with TBI last year. We couldn't really come to an agreement in there, and hopefully the USDA does bring some of that to us. The big problem is when you take it and you concentrate it, it goes above 0.3. It can be up to 3, 4, 5%. It's definitely hot at that point, and there's no reason why someone can't produce this extract in Knoxville and be working with a contract manufacturer in Memphis or in Nashville and be able to move that across the state. Currently, if they were to move that across the state and be pulled over and had that tested, it would pop hot for marijuana, and then they would legally be in a lot of trouble for having a semi-load full of crude that could be considered marijuana. It's one of the biggest problems that we have in the state. We've created a really good opportunity for farmers, but we've quietly forgotten the processors, and there's cogs of this wheel to make the economy, the economics of the industry work, and we have to have protections in place for these processors. Otherwise our farmers are going to have anywhere to go. So I definitely would like that to be considered going forward in this next session. And then products Melissa mentioned. I would love for my grandmother to be, she takes about 3,000 milligrams a month. She's off of 6 different medications. But I can't trust her local stores, so I send that to her. I would love to see something as far as product testing. That way I'd feel safe about sending my grandmother to a store because, as most people say, it's the children and the elderly that are going to be the most affected by bad product. A 30-year-old male, I'm probably not going to be affected that much, but children are and the elderly are as well. And then with testing, currently, right now, if we were to move from the Delta 9.3 allowance to a total 0.3 allowance, like Joe mentioned, it would cripple the genetic side of the industry. We would basically go back to certified seed. Problem with that is, if we were to move towards a certified seed law, there is no program under the ayahuasca, which is the certified seed program internationally. They do not have those rules in place, the regulations in place to create certified seed that is a high CBD cultivar. So with that being said, there was a federal attorney general meeting where they brought in all the states and we're talking about this, and people are moving towards that 1% total, like Joe mentioned. Reason for that, the plant is limited genetically without modification to a 30-to-1 ratio. So if you grow it out and take it to its best point of CBD, you're going to be outside of the legal limit.
Question for you on that, Clint. So is that something that we're waiting for from the Farm Bill and FDA at the same time, or is this another sidebar conversation at the federal level?
This could be included in the USDA, but more than likely not. I would expect them to move forward with the 0.3% total decarb or similarly reliable method.
But I'm making reference to the certified seed and
that's that's an international standard.
Okay, and so is the federal government having that conversation right now just for the United States, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think it gets into how that program is going to work out, and if and when it goes into place to create certified seed under a program is going to take people several years anyways.
Oh.
So we're looking at 2023, 2024 just off the get-go on
So
that.
it'll be a big hump to overcome then.
Right. Right.
Senator Nicely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clint, you hear all these rumors, and you never know if they're true. Nobody knows if they're true, but I've heard that Kentucky had a problem with male genes in their crop.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Well, I believe you. Now, I believe it now.
Yep, 100% they had a problem. I mean, we had the same problem here.
Expound on that a little bit.
So just like I mentioned, the seed market's an incredible opportunity for people to make a lot of money. when people are wanting to put out 1,000 acres and you're averaging 1,500 plants per acre, seeds per acre, that's a lot of seeds. And when you're charging per seed instead of by the pound, the price shoots up really, really, really quick. So lots of times folks will present themselves as having good genetics, but they're far from it. So the company that you're speaking of up there in Kentucky, $44 million lawsuit. I've sat down with the guy, real nice guy. He thought he was buying feminized seed. And like I said, true feminized seed is about 1 in 4,000, so 99.96% female. And he was sold that that's what he was purchasing, and that was not what he actually purchased. What he purchased was about an 80% female crop, which meant that not only are the labor costs huge to go out there and get in field and mitigate all those males, it's almost impossible to do. So going forward, it'd be great if we had something in state that kind of held those people to it, but it's a very difficult thing to do if you don't have it in writing.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, even if you use clones, you'll get a few female plants that turn to be transgenders or something.
Yes, sir. So if the
And
clones
you still
were
have
not...
to walk your crop to make sure that you don't have one of these.
Yes, sir. So what can happen is the female plant can actually stress under certain environmental conditions to produce male pollen sacs on a female plant. A lot of the genetics we're growing here in state will do that, and for drought, for heat, lots of different reasons. The best way to do that is put it through stress testing before you put it to market. Again, there's such an opportunity for people to make money that lots of times they're not doing that, and so you will find sometimes seed in a clone crop.
Can you test how do you test to know if it's got male?
So you can do genetic testing for that. The issue with that is lots of times the paperwork that people put with it shows that they tested about 100 plants. When you're talking 1 in 4,000, how many plants should they actually be testing? And that number is about 10,000. So if you're purchasing seed that's claiming to be feminized and comes with the feminized genetic test to prove it, and they're saying it's a 100 plant test, I wouldn't buy that seed. It would need to be about a 10,000 plant count number to prove true feminization.
If you had a farmer that had clones, they're supposed to all be females, and one out of 1,200 or something may change. But if you walked your crop and got those males out of there, you should be all right.
Yes, sir. I had a lot of successful farmers this year, over 100 successful farmers using feminized genetics that went out and walked those fields and removed those males and were unpollinated.
Thank you.
All right, one more quick thing before I pass the mic here. He mentioned the drug testing bill, and it's kind of been a topic of concern. I can tell you that living in Rutherford County, I watched one of our city artists lose her job simply for taking a full spectrum CBD oil. A lot of that comes down to labeling and proper education for consumers. If they are truly a THC-free product, if they would label that accordingly, and also if we had some sort of label in place that showed that there was THC in a product, like in a medical or recreational state, when they sell a chocolate edible, it's got a real clear emblem on it that says that it contains THC. I believe Colorado and California now require them to imprint that into the chocolate, gummy, whatever it is, that marker. I'd love to see something like that for any full spectrum product in the state, so people aren't educated in the fact that they could fail a drug test for taking a full spectrum hemp product. But if we had that there, when they looked at the bottle, they may understand that the product they're taking does include THC. And it's also been mentioned that there are limitations to the testing, qualitative and quantitative. Quantitative meaning that you get to actually put a number on it. There is research out there that shows what different body types will have in their bloodstream, and that's one of the bills we'd like to bring to you all this session. Is where is someone's total THC? Because it's like the TBI showed, there's THC and there's active and then inactive metabolites of that. But if we can come up with and meet somewhere in the middle on what are those levels should be. There's plenty of research that shows what a typical recreational marijuana user has in their bloodstream and people that full spectrum. hemp extract will have in their bloodstream. And so I think we can meet in the middle somewhere there. And obviously, independent businesses and truckers, that some of those industries are going to be very, very difficult to implement that type of program into. But I think we need to get the ball rolling somewhere so that.
And I hate to say it, we're coming close to an end here, but Senator Nicely, do you have
Real
a question?
quick, why don't the association figure out what the military does and see if you can live with that, and then we'll run about TBI and see if we can all live with it. And it sounds to me like if it's good enough for the fighter pilots, it'd all be good for enough somebody working on the assembly line.
I'll tell you that their quantitative limitations are still extremely, extremely low. They won't even allow anyone in active military to eat a hemp seed-based product. That's how far they are from the actual truth of the plant. So while they may have a quantitative number, that number is set extremely low.
Well, a low number would be better than no number.
I agree with you. Well, currently we do have in place for lots of different folks, insurance and whatnot, they do have that number like Joe mentioned, but it's basically a pass-fail number. It's such a low number that it's basically presence or not. And we need to be able to actually say, well, if someone is taking 1,000 to even like a 3,000 milligram hemp-based product daily, and they're consuming, several hundred milligrams of CBD in a full spectrum fashion, where are those limitations that we know they're not actually being impacted for taking that amount? And I hate for people to lose their job for taking a legal product.
Right. We've got 5 minutes left. Can we wrap up in that short of a time? Mr. Ed Harrison?
What am I?
You got
here to answer questions, or would you?
Yeah,
got 5 minutes
I'm here to answer questions. I'll give you a little bit of
Okay.
background as to where I'm coming from in the industry versus these guys. I work for, am a managing partner of a vertically integrated boutique operation. I use that word boutique in the sense that we cater to holistic physicians around the country. In that sense, what we do is we grow organically. We produce in an artisanal way, which is different than virtually anybody else that's out there, but we have control over that process from end to end. Every single bottle that we put out would meet any of the requirements that have been discussed today. So anything having to do with heavy metals or microbial contaminants or pesticides or full cannabinoid or terpene or flavonoid profiles, they're all in every bottle today and have been since the day that we started. So we have the quality in place, and we have a very organic mindset that we've produced. So we understand what works, and my partner is a physician, a holistic physician who works with patients on a daily basis. So we have huge feedback from both our own population and the network of doctors that we serve. So many of the questions that have come up here relative to drug testing are absolutely paramount in the minds of people across the country. That's a certainty. At the same time, the good news is that, yeah, the numbers that do seem to come back are in some middle ground that is very, very different than what a recreational user would have. So there seems to be some place where negotiations can take place. In addition, we do a lot of organic herbs, and it's been very beneficial and comforting to see that there are products that you can take of an herbal variety that will alleviate the accumulation of cannabinoids in the bodies, things like basil, and a product that we make called Silmax. We've seen this in the liver start to drop those levels. And so people with THC contamination, we see that drop down in people who use our particular basil extracts. One of the things that I see that hasn't been discussed to any great depth is the FDA involvement. It's my personal belief, based on my direct FDA involvement with our product, that is going to be a core area of education for processors across the state. There's many, many people who are simply not prepared to deal with the degree of intricacy and the degree of detail that the FDA is looking for. This is at an auditability level, so every step that you execute in terms of sourcing the product, manufacturing the product, packaging the product, needs to be documented, needs to be managed, needs to be conformed with the standard operating procedure, and that's something that's simply not the case in most of the producers that are out there. If we're going to have enough production capacity to deal with these 3,700 farmers that are out there, that's an area of growth that needs to be done and needs to be done properly. So from there, I can take any questions.
Thank you for that information. Committee members, any questions? Senator Bowling?
Thank you for allowing me to come. I know that there are certain countries, Israel in particular, that's really known for their pioneering and research in medical cannabis. Is Canada the leading, is there any country or any state now that I know we've been to Kentucky. Several of us went up and visited with Kentucky because they decriminalized it and legalized it before a lot of states did. And so they're farther down the road, if you will, in many ways than we are. Is there a prototype, I guess is what I'm asking, that they've done a lot of things right?
As far as a research model, it's a hard question to answer. I would probably defer more towards California simply because medical marijuana has been in place there since 1996. So you've had practitioners working with real patients in large numbers for a long time. The downside of that particular model, it's pretty Byzantine. It's split all over the place, and there are no real standards per se. What's come into play since 2016 is the Bureau of Cannabis Control, which tries to deal from this, seed to sale end of things. But from a medicinal standpoint, part of this is the blockage of the federal regulations. Because they're not there, you don't have that funding. The sad fact is that most of this funding is enhanced by federal dollars, and without federal dollars, you're kind of left for a little here, a little there. So you don't have that prototype, I think, that you're looking for today.
But let's go to Israel. They have been researching it for 50 years, and Dr. Raphael Mashula has just come up with another incredible discovery within the last month or two. And so we don't need to reinvent the wheel, I guess is what I'm saying, when there's some very replicable, empirically based.
Yeah, my personal bias towards the effectiveness, the efficacy of administering this plant within the body would far more veer towards what Dr. Meshulam and what's happening in the Israeli program, wherein whole plant derivatives are utilized.
Right.
We've seen this repeatedly. The whole entourage or ensemble effect, as it's called, is just dramatically more effective than isolated compounds. There's no question.
Exactly.
So the Israeli model is one that certainly has a lot to offer, and if I was to throw a dart, I'd probably go with that one.
Thank you.
Chairman Smith.
Thank you. And just an observation, I listened to Mr. Kirkpatrick, and it sounds like this came from the Garden of Eden, and everyone needs to be taking cannabidiol every single day because it cures everything, and we need to bathe in it. But then, knowing this harkens back, I'm old enough to remember when doctors and doctors' coats told us that cigarettes were safe. And now, 5 years ago, we were told that the Juuls and the vaping was perfectly safe. And this was going to be the put an end to tobacco use. And so I worry, and I join you, is it Mr. Harrison? We need some kind of standardization, and I appreciate your very reasoned response because I'm leaving this with more questions than I had to begin with on the consumable side. Yes. On the hemp industrial, thinking about how we implement this into our industrial mechanics. I know Volkswagen is in my district. They very much are interested in this, but when I think about consuming this in the human body, I really am very deeply concerned that we've got to have some type of a federal standard through which to work, because I'm not willing yet to jeopardize the liability of jobs, school bus drivers. There's a lot of concerns that I have, but I appreciate your input, and I really appreciate all your input relative to where we are, but I think this opens the door for more study, and there's more questions. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you for those comments. Joe?
Thanks for the mention, Representative Smith. I have a dog that has epilepsy, and he doesn't respond to CBD at all. He takes it, but it doesn't do it. It doesn't. He had a seizure today. He had one yesterday, and I'm the last person that would suggest that hemp or CBD cures everything. However, we could certainly fix a lot of things with it.
And we've gone over time, but I was hoping in calling this task force, of course, with Senator Nicely and Representative Hurt, that we would have more information from the federal government on the Farm Bill, as well as more information from FDA. Of course, it was brought up as far as the banking issues, and some of those have been taken care of, but there's still a greater discussion going on. And the reason I'm bringing all of this up to the task force members, we can call 2 more meetings per this bill that was passed, but my hope is if we do, let's wait until the federal government has done their job so we could use our time more wisely in helping out you folks at Tennessee State University, the private industries, the Hemp Association, and all of that. But if there is nothing else to come before this committee, we adjourn.